Good morning, everyone, and thank you to those of you who are here and those of you who are joining us online this morning. As I think most of you are aware, last May, Gloria Dei decided to enter into a new ministry for asylum seekers at Gloria Dei, converting one of our underutilized classrooms into a living space that will serve as temporary housing for an individual or small family as they adapt to life in the United States and work towards self-sufficiency. We are thrilled today to welcome Rachel Uthmann, who is the Director of Training for the International Association for Refugees, which is a faith-based organization that works globally, but it's headquartered here in Minnesota. 20 years ago, Rachel started working with asylum seekers and refugees in Greece and later worked in Italy and England before moving to Minnesota 5 years ago. Rachel holds a bachelor's degree in theology and a master's in global history, as well as training certificates related to caring for survivors of trauma. She now lives in Richfield with 4 generations of family under one roof. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll just make sure you can hear me okay. I might just, sorry, I should have sorted that out in advance, but I'm a little bit taller than maybe the last person who was here. So I want to make sure you can hear me well. Please let me know if you can't, okay? At any point, I might wander a bit and you can just yank me back. And thank you so much for the introduction and for letting me join you here today. I'm really glad to be among you. It's been great getting to know Claire and Lenore and others all along the way in this process as we've done some discussions about asylum seekers. So that's my topic this morning. And you might be familiar with the idea of asylum, but I don't want to take for granted that everyone is. So I just want to start with very, very short explanation at the very beginning about what is an asylum seeker. Maybe you've heard the word refugee more than you've heard the words asylum seeker. And a refugee has a very specific legal definition that came out of the context of World War II. After World War II, many Western governments came together with the United Nations, forming the United Nations and making declarations that we don't ever want to see happen again, what happened in Nazi Germany. And we don't ever want to, once again, turn away people who in retrospect really needed our protection in order to survive. And so a definition was agreed upon that a refugee is someone who has a well-founded fear of persecution or death and is unable or unwilling to accept the protection of their home country because of fear based on 5 factors. So it's a kind of a gangly legal definition, if you will, but the key things to understand are a refugee is someone who has a well-founded fear of death or persecution and is unable to go home or stay home for that reason. So a refugee is someone who has this well-founded fear and has had a third party agree with them that their fear was well-founded. So a foreign government, perhaps the United Nations directly, someone has agreed with them that their fear was well-founded. An asylum seeker, on the other hand, is someone who has a well-founded fear of persecution or death for all of the exact same reasons that a refugee does. The difference is that their process is not yet finished. So they're fleeing home for the same reasons. Those reasons could be religious persecution, national persecution or national problems, like you can think of government corruption or perhaps civil war, could be based on ethnicity, could be based on membership in a social group or membership in a political group. So it has to be one of those 5 things. But the same criteria are at play, whether we're talking about a refugee or an asylum seeker. The difference is where they are in the process. In the United States, we're used to thinking of a refugee through our resettlement program, where someone has had the chance to tell their story and have someone agree with them that they had a well-founded fear and verify that overseas somewhere. And then they get flown here already with paperwork in hand. And everything is very challenging. It's not easy, but they are on a trajectory toward permanent residency and eventually citizenship should they choose. However, an asylum seeker is someone who's already here and whose process isn't yet finished. And so again, fleeing all the same reasons, so very much in line with refugee, but their process is still in ongoing. So they're already here. Maybe they're already here because they were already here when war broke out in their country. Perhaps they were in the United States on a work visa or a business visa or as a student, and something happened at home that made them say, I can't go back. Or they had a family member call them and say, someone has come looking for you. It's no longer safe. That happens, unfortunately. Or it might be that they came here explicitly for the purpose of seeking asylum. They were terrified for their life, and they came and presented themselves, could be at the border, could be at an airport, could be all sorts of different situations. But the point is, they're in that same kind of category of someone who's been forcibly displaced, like a refugee. The difference is their case is still in process. So they're in a legal process in the United States, waiting for a judge to agree with them or disagree with them that their fear was well-founded. And at that point, they either can stay or they'll be asked to leave. So they're sort of in the process, but the same sorts of reasons. So I have just a short video I want to share with you that is a reading done by a person who was seeking asylum of a poem written compiling the stories of other people seeking asylum. So you'll hear it's a poem, and he's reading little bits of other people's stories woven together. They give you a picture of what the experience of seeking asylum might be like. So let's try it and see if our technology cooperates with us. All right, just a moment.
I was born in Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan. I was born in Kashmir, between India and Pakistan. I was born in Iran. I was born in Iraq. I was born in Sri Lanka. I worked as an architect, building up my business. I worked as a negotiator, liaising with the government. I worked as an engineer. I worked as a veterinarian. I worked as an accountant. I'm a member of the Hazara ethnic group. I'm opposed to the government's corruption of Kashmir. I am a firm believer in women's rights. I'm a whistleblower for the government's corruption. I'm an ethnic Tamil. I was held down while I watched my father beaten to death. I was kidnapped by the government and taken to an interrogation room. I was knocked out with the butt of a rifle. I was shot 3 times. I was arrested and put in a camp. I bribed a guard to help me escape in the middle of the night. I fled through the mountains, and a farmer smuggled me across the border. I hid underground for 5 months. I sold my property and used the money for a plane ticket. I cut a hole in the wire fence and crawled through the jungle to a safe house. I was so relieved when I arrived. I was happy to be safe from the militia. I was alive. I was overjoyed. I was finally free. I was detained without a lawyer. I was put behind bars. I was called by a number, not a name. I was kept in an isolation cell. I was abused by the guards. Why am I locked up if I haven't committed a crime? How can I be in prison without a trial? Why can't they treat me like a human being? Why am I kept here all alone? Why haven't I been told when this will end? I didn't want to be a refugee. I didn't want to come to your country. I didn't want to leave my family. I didn't want to lose my house. I didn't want to start again. I'm not here to get rich. I'm not here to receive charity. I'm not here to steal your job. I'm not here to cheat the system. I'm not here by choice. I'm here because otherwise I would be dead. I'm here because the militia threatened to kill me and my family. I'm here because I was shot. I'm here because my house was burned down. I'm here because I have nowhere else to go. I was born in a dangerous land. I was persecuted for who I am and what I believe. I was tortured in an interrogation room. I was dumped in the ocean. I was locked up in detention. I'm an asylum seeker, every asylum seeker. And this is my story. I am not an opportunist. I'm not an illegal alien. I'm not a political issue. I am a human being. Please treat me like one.
I hope that in that you heard a few things. I know it could be hard to hear a little bit too at the beginning especially, but I hope you heard a few things. One is that he said, I'm a human being. Please treat me as such. I'm not a political issue, even though asylum seeking can become a political issue. He also said, I'm not an illegal alien. And I'm not here to game the system or cheat the system. And I think these are really important points. So I'd like to just make sure that you're aware of a couple of things before we go on any further. Okay. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was established in 1948, says, among other things, that everyone has the right to seek and enjoy asylum from persecution in other countries. It's an international law document that was established again in the wake of World War II to say that people who are fleeing for their lives have the right to seek safety in other countries. This is something that I think sometimes people aren't aware, but we're a signatory to this document, the United States, as well as the vast majority of the world's countries, that agreed together as an international community in the wake of horrors that we witnessed, that we never want to see it happen again. Further on, there's several documents that are interesting, and this might be more than you want to know, but it's really important that, again, coming out of that context of the middle of the 20th century, the convention first in 1951 and the protocol in 1967, according to the status of refugees, which is sometimes called the Geneva Conventions. You may have heard that term as a more familiar one. Says that subject to specific exemptions, refugees should not be penalized for their illegal entry or stay. This recognizes that the seeking of asylum can require refugees to breach immigration rules. How many Americans know that? The Geneva Convention says that if you are fleeing, again, in the context of people fleeing for their lives, that they should not be penalized for doing whatever they have to do to save their life. And if that means crawling through a fence or falsifying a document or even paying a smuggler, there should be no penalty if you're really doing it in fear of your life. Of course, there's a process that has to be respected to evaluate whether someone's actually doing it in fear of their life. And that's the process of seeking asylum. But the right to start an asylum claim is something that we have agreed upon as an international community and is actually enshrined in US law directly under the 1980 Refugee Act. One more piece of law and then I'll move on from this, but I just want you to know in case you've never heard it. That same convention protocol also says that no one should return a refugee against his or her will in any manner whatsoever to a territory in which they fear for their life or freedom. And again, this is also in US law under the 1980 Refugee Act. If that's something that's brand new to you and you're like, wow, I have a million questions, I don't want to derail all of our time this morning, but I do want you to know that it's there. The handout that was on your seat there from the American Immigration Council called Asylum in the United States goes through that and where it shows up in US law in more detail. So if that's something of interest to you, I really encourage you to take the time at home to read through those pages. There's some really great information available. But the key thing is to understand, again, to just summarize where we've been so far, is that a refugee or is somebody who's been forced to flee their home. That's fairly well understood. But an asylum seeker is someone who's been forced to flee their home for the same reasons and is just in a different place in the process. It is a human right, it's a legal right under US law and international law to seek asylum if you're truly in fear of your life. So when we talk about people seeking asylum in the United States, we're not talking about somebody who's cheating something or doing something illegal or nefarious in some way. And unfortunately, that's how it's often spoken about in the news or the media. So I wanted to just make that clear at the beginning. So I understand that you as a congregation have made the choice, which I'm so thankful for, to welcome asylum seekers in your midst and to care for them through this Room 99 ministry. I think that's just a wonderful thing and a tremendous encouragement to me as someone who does this kind of work for my life to see you do this. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for embarking on this journey. So I'd like to just offer a few thoughts about things that might be helpful to know or think about as you move toward that. And then we'll leave some space for questions at the end. Okay? All right. So I want you to think for just a moment about someone who's been forced to flee their home. Maybe one of the stories, the little bits you heard in that video are sticking with you. You think about someone who was forced to flee because they were in political opposition or any other number of reasons. What is it, do you think, is their biggest need? What is it that they need? If you have a thought that comes to mind, you can speak it out. I'll repeat it for those at home to hear.
Friendship.
Friendship, okay.
Safety.
Shelter. Opportunity.
Healing.
Yeah. A lot of that. Good. Yeah, great answers. Yeah. All of those things are true. I won't argue with any of you. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that shows me that you're in a good place. The fact that you came up with that variety of answers shows us that you're in a good spot to welcome people. Because it's a complicated thing when someone's been forced to leave everything behind. And often, if you ask folks that question, I often get stories or answers that are, oh, they need a job, they need documents, and maybe they need shelter, and those things are true. But I'd like to say that the needs are much broader than that. They're much more human. Because again, remember at the end of the video, our friend said, I'm a person, please treat me like one. So I have just a little diagram that we find helpful. Our organization, International Association for Refugees, uses this kind of conceptual model to help us think about what it is people need. I'll be very brief with this part. But the little green line there represents someone's life as they were living it when they're normal, whatever that looked like for them, wherever they were on the planet, before the disaster struck. Disaster then strikes. It could be, again, civil war, very large-scale disaster, or it could be very, very personal or political in nature and just them. Whatever that disaster was, when it happened, it's sort of like the bottom dropped out on their world. Or if you can think in terms of a wound, it's like the bleeding started on a big wound, right? And when the bleeding starts or the bottom drops out, a lot of things need to happen in a hurry to keep someone alive. Again, if we're talking about the threat to someone's life or safety, then we have immediate problems in order to sustain life. And those are the things that typically humanitarian aid organizations engage in. Security, which is another word for safety, which I heard spoken. Shelter, which you named. Food, water. We can only live, 3 days without water. Very short time period here. Medical care, which means more like triage, like did you have a broken limb, kind of basic stuff. But these are the things that humanitarian aid groups do as an emergency response when someone's forced to flee. And if they do their job well, the person's life is preserved and they're stabilized, we might say. I think about I went to the ER a couple of days ago with my grandfather. And the first thing they do, right, is check your vitals and make sure you're not going to die this minute, and do whatever it takes to keep that from happening. And then they start doing all these assessments about deeper things, right? And so it's sort of like the emergency room, the red line. It's that, what do I need to do right this minute to preserve the life? And if they're successful, which we hope they are, and often they are, and we thank God for these people who do this work, then we get to this little yellow line, which we call stabilized. But just like the person in the emergency room, that doesn't solve the problem that brought them there, does it? It just means they're alive. Good news, but now what? We have another problem. So we represent the now what by this green line that we call recovery work. And the recovery work is acknowledging that for friends of ours who have needed to flee their homes, who found themselves stabilized, they say, this isn't really life, it's actually barely existing, is how I describe it. And we say, what is it that's going to take to get somebody from that place back to a place of flourishing, of thriving, and being able to engage in a new normal? Things will never be the same before they fled. But what is it that it'll take for them to be able to engage in a new place in a healthy way and to recover themselves? And we think it has a lot to do with sustaining hope. Hope is a really precious commodity. And when we think about what does it take to sustain hope, and when we ask people for whom this is their daily experience, they have told us these 5 things. The first one there is community, which I think someone, Pastor Lois, perhaps you said friendship, or someone said friendship. Yeah, friendship was one of the words I heard, which I think I call it community. That sense that all of us at the end of the day need someone to look us in the eyeballs and say we can belong, and treat us like that human being. In the poem you heard, he said I was treated like a number. I was a number, not a name. I was detained without any kind of legal recourse or options. I was isolated. I mean, all of these things that are dehumanizing. And in order to recover, people need to be welcomed and treated like a human being. That's community. They need to be welcomed and invited into a space where people can know them and say that they have worth. The second thing on the list, again, this comes from the words of those who fled their homes themselves, is faith, questions of faith. When somebody has that kind of life-altering experience, everything comes into question again. And whatever faith background they came from, they often have to revisit those questions. Is there a God? If there is, what is that person, that God like? How do I explain what happened to me? Right? All of these things kind of come back to someone after a difficult event. So they need an opportunity to be connected, to answer questions of faith that may have come up for them again, to recover their emotional well-being, healing. That was the word you tossed out. To recover their emotional well-being, recover from trauma. There's a lot we can say there. To develop new capacities for a new context. We might use the word skills, but I don't use the word skills first, because when I say that, people think jobs. And yes, somebody might need a new skill for a new job, but they also need to learn how to navigate in a place that depends on GPS and a smartphone, or how to pay your electric bill. I've lived abroad in several different countries, and each time it's a completely different system, and I needed a whole lot of help. And I thought I had it fairly together, but yet I was very lost. It has nothing to say with the person's intelligence or the capacity personally as a human. It's just that when we're in a new spot, we need to learn new things. And then the last thing on the list there, which might surprise many, is contribution. People say that in order to recover, what they need to know is that they're not just a sad person in need, but they have something to give. So if we take this model for a moment, I think about who is it? Where in our world might you find a community of people who are intentionally looking to welcome others, who are open to having discussions about questions of faith, who care for one another's emotional well-being, that it's a place that allows people to learn and grow in new capacities and gives them the message that every person has something to contribute? Where would you find that? I mean, I don't know, maybe Gloria Dei Lutheran Church might be an example, right? I think any healthy congregation has these capacities, has this ability to welcome, and is actually the ideal context, if done well, to allow for the healing and the restoration of hope for someone whose life has been so disrupted. So good news, you're in a good spot, you're on a good path, and you are embarking on a wonderful journey. And good news, there's something for everyone in the room to contribute. You don't have to be a legal specialist or a shelter specialist or anything that, but someone who can look someone else in the eyeball, ask their name and introduce yours and spend a little time listening can make one of the biggest contributions that's needed. Because the thing that's overlooked on this time and time again is the community part. We take it for granted and skip right over it. Yeah, but they need a job. But you know what people tell me who've been forced to flee their home is I would rather starve. I would rather sleep on the streets and have no food and have somebody who treats me like a human being. So I want to just encourage you, don't skip past that part. Don't underestimate what it is you have to give, because actually you have what is most needed here. One quote I'll end that part with, and then I just want to give you a couple of ideas of how to do that well. This is from a book called The Middle of Everywhere by Mary Pfeiffer. She was a journalist who got engaged in helping with refugees and asylum seekers. And she wrote, this was about 20 years ago, but she said, she was referring to these refugees who had been resettled from Kenya. We offered them therapy and doctors, but the first thing they wanted was to get all their people together and have a celebration. They knew what we didn't. I'll put that part in. They knew that before housing, jobs, medical care, or money, community is what heals. I can't say it any better, so I let her say it. That's something that as myself, as a person who was raised with relative privilege and stability and wealth, and never having to fear for my life in this way, I have missed this. I have thought that the urgent need is the job or the whatever, and sometimes it is. Both are true. There's room for both. But never miss that what people need the most is someone to say you belong and you're welcome here. And I think you guys are poised well to do that. So I thank God for you. So 3 thoughts, and then I'll leave space for discussion, questions. Tips on how to do this well. The first one is stating the obvious, but not the obvious. Remember that the asylum seeker is a person. And I feel silly for having to say it, but I'll say it. Remember the asylum seeker is a person. They're a person first. They're a person who happens to find themselves in very vulnerable circumstances. They're a person who has a lot more to their story than the fact that they had to flee their home. They're a person who comes with a full history, with hopes and dreams and needs and weaknesses and strengths and gifts and blessing. They're a person. So in my theological education, that tells me that they are made in the image of God, and that therefore they carry blessing and gift with them. Opportunity, capacity, goodness. They're a person first. And then they happen to be finding themselves in this difficult situation. But if we treat them first as an asylum seeker, we often miss all the rest of the person, right? We think of them as that poor sad, pitiable charity case. And who here likes to be somebody's charity case? It is absolutely no fun. I haven't had to be that very often, again, because I've lived in relative safety and stability. But the little tiny glimpses I've got is highly uncomfortable, right? And this is somebody we're talking about who sought asylum that has lived that life. That has been the theme. I am the sad charity case. I am the pitiable sad person. So first remember the asylum seeker is a person and treat them like a person. So ask questions and engage with all of them, with all of their life, not just the asylum part, not just the why did you flee part, but the what are your dreams part. What are your hopes? Who is it that God has made you to be? How are you wired? What is it that you need? You get really beautiful things to learn on the way. The second one is to approach the relationship as an adult. Then you might be like, why did they bring this person here who's telling us these things we know? But it's so often missed, I need to say it again. Because again, often as in the American mindset where I have and this person doesn't, and I'm giving and they're taking, and I have, they need, I give, they take, this kind of relationship, which is usually what we do about charity, is a really destructive pattern actually for everybody involved, in my opinion. It's occasionally required in an emergency. I have and you take. That's sometimes what you have to do when someone's life is in danger, but that's not the long-term posture that we want. So I, as was mentioned in my introduction, I live in 4 generations. I have a grandfather who's 99 and a half who lives in our home a good portion of the year. And I have a 13-year-old daughter and other people mixed in there in between. And I was reflecting in September about the difference in the way that I relate to my 13-year-old and my 99-year-old. Now, they both have needs right now, but the needs are different. But they're not always that different, quite frankly. They both need to be fed, and they both probably would benefit from eating their vegetables, but neither of them want to. And when I talk to my 13-year-old as a parent, I have the option of saying, but this is what we do here. We eat vegetables and you need to eat it. And if you choose not to, then, we won't be having ice cream or, whatever. There's all sorts of methods and opinions about how to go about that. But whatever, I have a responsibility to her as a parent to kind of, at least hopefully, Lord have mercy, train, shape, something, direct, maybe. I don't know. I feel kind of helpless at the moment. But my 99-year-old grandfather, I can't do the same. I want to sometimes. I've seen others in my family try it sometimes. But telling him he must eat his vegetables or he can't have his ice cream just doesn't work. He eats his ice cream anyway. And I can't blame him because he's 99 and I think the man should have ice cream. So, give the guy ice cream, right? But anyway, but the point is, the way I relate to him, when I say, Grandpa, it might be good for you to eat the vegetables. I can invite, I can woo, I can make opportunity available. I can model. I can add cheese sauce, right? I can try to adjust. I can ask him what it is that would help him, right? What he thinks the problem is, what might make it better. I can negotiate a little bit. But at the end of the day, if the man doesn't choose to eat his vegetables, he doesn't eat his vegetables. And that's how it works because he's 99 and I'm not his parent. So the way I relate to my child, the way I relate to my grandfather, are very different. But they look kind of the same. And people relate to asylum seekers and refugees often more like I relate to my 13-year-old. This is what you need to do. Here's what you need. Here's where you should be. This is where you should be. Why are you late? What happened to you? And I would like to encourage you to treat them like an adult. Treat them like I treat my grandfather. You can invite, you can offer, you can suggest, you can model, you can problem solve, you can ask them what they think the problem is. You can try to work together to find a solution. And at the end of the day, if they don't want to go to medical school, you think the best solution for their life will be entering medical school. Guess what? You're not them and you're not in charge. So don't treat them like a child. Treat them like an adult. In adult relationships, we offer, we invite, we connect, we ask. With an adult, if I see an adult crying on the sidewalk, I ask them, what's wrong? What do you need? What's going on? What do you think the problem is? What do you think the solution is? And I work with them to try to help them achieve that. If it's a 2-year-old on the sidewalk crying, I might ask what's wrong, but pretty quickly I'm going to start assessing and making my own decisions about what needs to happen next. Remember, this is an adult. If it's not an adult, they probably came with an adult, and so talk to the adult, okay? So remember, asylum seekers are a person first, and please approach the relationship as an adult. Last tip, aim for mutual relationship. That's what community is at the end of the day. It's about mutuality. It's about the fact that that person has something to give. And you also have something to give, which means that person has something they need, and you also have something you need. One of the best preparations you can do for welcoming asylum seekers is to stop and think, what do I need? That sounds really backwards, doesn't it? What is it that you need? I, along the way in my ministry, have come from a place of thinking I had so much to give. Even though I wasn't totally sure what it was, I was sure there was something. That's a long story. to coming to a place and saying, I stay in this work because I have so much to gain. I have gained, I can't tell you, I could write books about how much I've gained. I have gained help in my faith, in learning what it looks like to suffer well, in learning what it looks like to sustain hope when there is no reason to have it. I have learned what celebration looks like. I've learned what friendship and hospitality and true welcome look like, and we have never known anywhere else. I may have been economically fine, wealthy by the global standard for sure, but I was spiritually poor when I entered this work, and I still am. I still have places of poverty in me. And naming that and knowing it allows me to enter into these relationships, treating the other person like a blessing to be discovered rather than a problem to be solved. So remember the asylum seeker as a person, approach the relationship as an adult, and aim for mutual relationships. I'm not going to talk through it, but I'll just name the other handout that was on your page, there on your chair, sorry. Was called Avoiding Dependency with Asylum Seekers. It is a lot more detail for those of you who are like, wow, this is really interesting, but isn't getting me anywhere. You can read it at home. I'd also be happy to interact about it, but just some specific ideas of what does it look like to approach a relationship as an adult and to do it in a way that doesn't create dependency where it isn't needed, but restores dignity and healing to people. So I leave it with you as a resource. So I'm going to pause there in my slideshow so the folks at home can see me better.
Just let the people at home know that that's the links that I gave them in the chat.
Okay, and Pastor Lois said she gave you the links to this documents that I'm referring to in the chat, so you should be able to access them yourself. And yeah, I'm going to pause there and ask what kinds of questions and thoughts are going through your mind. Because I could talk all day, but I'd rather actually talk about things that are helpful. Questions, thoughts? Yes, sir.
Listening to you, I still think a lot of people experience paralysis because of the fear of failure in the effort to welcome asylum seekers. We don't, it is, as you said, so huge, but are we going to fail and are we going to cause more damage? So I think you mentioned some good points about it, but I think even as Americans, we always think we have to fix things. And that's the other thing that drives a lot of our work. And I don't know, it's just kind of overwhelming. You bring all that, those dynamics, and you have different people with different dynamics and different focus states.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so the comment for those of you at home was that it can be overwhelming or a little bit paralyzing because there's a fear of failure, of making it worse or doing some harm on the way. And it can feel like a paralysis or a bit overwhelming. And thinking about how we also often approach with a need to fix. And I think you really need something good there. That is one of the barriers to treating somebody like an adult, is thinking that I have to fix it. Somehow I'm the solution, and therefore I have a responsibility to fix it. And obviously everyone wants solutions, but the difference in fixing, usually, I think what you're referring to is when I come in, I'm going to save the day. I'm a superhero, here to fix it. Versus coming in and saying, hey, let's fix it together. And which starts with, what do you think the problem is? Asking the person, what do you think the problem is? And then saying, okay, what do you think the solution is? And going together along the road, side by side, rather than I drag you, lead you, force you, or solve for you, right? Yeah, I appreciate your comment, and the paralysis is real, but I hope that my words are an encouragement to you that actually this is very simple work. It's very hard work, and it's very simple work at the same time. It's simple, like treat the person like an adult. And trust that God is among you. Trust that God is among you. That God has brought you to this place and prepared you to welcome. And it's going to be okay. And you will make mistakes. You'll probably do all sorts of silly things. I certainly have. I do all the time. I still do. But I trust God's grace is big enough to hold it together. And I learn. I ask, what have I done? And I try to do better next time. We all do that, right? Don't be afraid of entering in and I think often what people are afraid of is also the other, right? The other is different and scary, and what do they have in them, whatever. And that's why I say remember they're a person and treat them like an adult. And I think if those things are held in mind, you won't do more harm. You might make some bumbling errors because we're human and that's what happens.
I want to mention to you folks here, my friends, that when I was a young person, I lived in a little town, Fairchild, Wisconsin, 600 people. And in this town, there was a quote, Reverend Melama. And he was not a very nice person. He was dirty and nobody really was his friend. Well, guess what? He got some people to come over, 3 people from Latvia, Fred, the man, Lucy, the wife, and Grandma. And I will never forget the day I saw those people walking down the streets in my little town and saying, who are they? Where did they come from? So when the little town of 500 people heard where these people were living, the first thing they said was, we've got to get them out of there, including my mother and father and my aunts and uncles. And they became long living friends.
Yeah, beautiful.
But just because this person had the name of Reverend, they were supposed to live there. And I remember Fred saying, I will not have my wife stay in that place another night. And, you know, this is so real to me.
Yeah,
And it really was part of our life for the rest of our life. In fact, in the end, Fred's wife died, and Fred married my cousin.
And now Fred is family.
Yeah.
That's great, thank you. So we had someone in the room recounting their own experience of seeing someone welcomed, several people welcomed in their small town in Wisconsin as a child, and the beauty and how those people became friends.
Yes.
Thank you. Saw a hand in the back.
When you talk about treating them as people and as an adult and so on, I think the word partnership. I have a nonprofit where we work with a school or a women's center in Kenya, and we use the word partnership a lot so that we don't forget of that kind of a relationship, which is not an up-down relationship, but an equal relationship. What can we bring to the table, but also just as importantly, what do they bring to the table and
Absolutely.
respect that. And so I just like you using that word as a reminder over and over again of what the relationship is.
Yeah, thank you. We had someone suggest the word partnership is a good word to describe the side-by-side way of recognizing that they have something to give and I have something to give, and together we do it. That's a great word. Thank you. Yes.
Speak a little bit about if they have a totally different language.
Yeah. Practical
and
question.
then how to be a really good, to do the things you're talking about.
Yeah. So the question was, what if the person has a very different language? You have a language gap between you. Then how do you approach this person in these ways? And that's been my experience, probably 70% of the time. But there's a big language gap. And it's always a little bit of an adventure. It's a great opportunity to laugh at yourself, which helps. But I think, there's a lot that can be done, quite frankly, with charades, and with drawings. I've done a lot of, blank paper. If you're drawing a picture of that, I draw a picture, you draw a picture, and we play this game back and forth. There's so much that can be covered there. Also, here in the Twin Cities, we have fabulous translation services that are available. So when it comes, I think the thing is, some people are prone to want to bring a translator in for everything, is the tea the right temperature or whatever. I'd say no, you just bumble along with that kind of stuff. But you do get a translator when needed for things that are very important, like legal needs, medical needs, any of those things on that red line. Negotiating shelter disagreements. So if they're staying in your ministry space and there's a sense of something's not right in terms of expectations, that's when you get a translator, because dignity requires that the person has the full deck of cards to deal with here and knowing what's happening, right? But if it's stuff like welcoming, the green line stuff of that friendship building, So much can be had by silence too. I think along with fixing, one of our other problems that we tend to carry into these spaces is the need to fill space, to make noise, to make sure there's no quiet, because, oh dear, the sky might fall, what's quiet, oh dear, right? It's all right. Deep breath. I might feel uncomfortable, but quiet is okay. And actually, when somebody sits with you, it's one of the most powerful things ever. I actually went through a really dark time in my life, totally unrelated to refugees that have happened many years ago. And I was dealing with a lot of grief and pain, and I felt very lost. And it was causing me to question my faith and all sorts of things about my reality. And I had a dear friend who came and she said, I'm going to come and sit with you every week. Every Tuesday after work, I'm going to come to your house and I'm going to sit. I'm like, you're going to come and sit. Well, that's awkward. No, I'm going to come and sit. I might pray for you if you're willing. And I was like, okay, whatever, And she came every week for months. And she sat. And I would offer her things. I try to do stuff for her. I try to pray for her. I try to make it, equal. She's like, no, you're in a pit. And I'm here with you sitting. And most of the time it was quiet. And it was one of the biggest gifts I've ever received. And you can do that too, and no language required. Just come and sit.
I was gonna say, some of our phones, you can do translate.
Absolutely, there's all sorts of fun. You can do Google Translate. Some languages, that works. Some languages, it really doesn't work. So depends on if you're dealing with Spanish, you're in pretty good shape. If you're dealing with Farsi, not so much. It just really varies. But there's great apps out there. There's all sorts of things, and it can be fun to learn together. You go, I have no idea how this works. Let's try it, and then have a great laugh when it doesn't, or maybe it does. But don't panic about that. That is not insurmountable to be able to do these things that were said. But great question, very real. Another question? Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about Jonathan House?
Sure. Yeah. So Jonathan House, which was actually named at the end of the video there, briefly, you may have seen, is as a ministry of our organization, International Association for Refugees. And it's a project, the name comes from 2 Samuel 23, I think, where David is fleeing from Saul, and Jonathan goes out, it says Jonathan went out to the desert to find David and helped him to find strength in God. So I went out to him in his moment of need to help him find strength in God. So this name Jonathan House comes from that concept that we're sitting with people who are in need. And one thing I didn't name about asylum seekers that I really should have is that one of the other differences between asylum and refugee being primarily the point in the process the person finds himself. But the other one is that under US law, someone who's seeking asylum is not allowed to work for over a year. They're not allowed to work. They don't have a work permit. They're not legally permitted to do anything financially gainful. And they're not eligible for any kind of government benefits. And so what does that leave a person? It leaves them with, sorry? Up a creek, you're right. They have up a creek and absolutely no paddle because we have no legal way to house or feed ourselves at that point. And so that's the standard procedure. It's a year-long process before they're even allowed to apply for a work permit. And during that time, people are extraordinarily vulnerable. So Jonathan House is a series of shelters that we have in cooperation with congregations in St. Paul. We're working on a third one in Minneapolis that provides safe and stable shelter, but not just shelter, also community. The invitation to community. You can't force community on anyone either, but you can offer it for people who are in the asylum seeking process. So we have a couple of locations here in St. Paul. So it's very similar to what you're looking to do with Room 99. Yeah.
I'm gonna take off and let Claire finish things up here, but thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Pastor Lewis.
Very good.
Yeah, who says second?
I want to thank everybody who has come today to be here for this forum. We lost a few to the choir, but it's been a good and engaged discussion. And thank you to everyone who is at home as well. It's always wonderful to see your faces, or at least your names on the screen. I want to point out that in the back of the room by the door is Pam Shoden. She has graciously and generously offered to sell the dishcloths that she makes and to donate the proceeds to the Room 99 ministry. So thank you, Pam, and take a look on your way out. She says she will make more if these all sell. So I want to also mention that this is the first in a two-part forum series. The second forum will be 2 weeks from today. And at that time, we'll talk about the concepts that Rachel has presented today and how we are applying them in the Room 99 ministry. We will bring you up to date on where we are with that ministry and talk through our process for selecting our first guests. So we hope you'll be able to join us again then. And with that, thank you, Rachel, for a very enlightening and touching presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.